Well, the Feast of St. Mark is tomorrow, and I wanted to do a program on the Gospel of Mark, not so much on St. Mark himself. I don't specialize in the traditions regarding the evangelists and you know whoever wrote the gospel that we call the gospel according to Mark is not of interest to me right now. But I am very interested in the gospel on which I wrote my doctoral dissertation on three verses regarding the so-called cleansing of the temple, which I think is best described more neutrally as the temple act. It's really the opposite of a cleansing. In Mark, it may be a cleansing in Luke or in John. Matthew follows Mark. But in Mark, it's an enactment of its upcoming destruction. So that I can say only the briefest things about Mark. Tradition, of course, has him as well, he's listed as a companion of Paul, who he has a dispute with, and then becomes, I think, Peter's interpreter. And the main thing I remember about him is something that this book on the saints, which is from the 50s, but very critical and very good, uh, edited by John Coulson, etc. These Oxford English people, whatever. What I remember was that Mark was called kolobodactylos, like thick-fingered or stumpy-fingered, and some may even think that that refers to his poor grammar or inelegant writing style. Those kinds of things are really of no great consequence to me. But the gospel itself, I think, is the first of the four canonical gospels, and it's the basis for really the synoptic gospels, and I think maybe even the Gospel of John, the fourth gospel, may have borrowed or looked at it in some way. I'm trying to find a page of Mark here. If you'll bear with me a second. Just to have something on the screen that's not as distracting as the Wikipedia article, which doesn't even apparently refer to the thick-fingered. And I've been looking for it. I think it's papyrus, but I'm not. I don't remember that right now. So, what is this Gospel of Mark about? And it's an interesting gospel. Traditionally, St. Matthew has been the gospel the church has liked. St. Dominic, the gospel he memorized was St. Matthew. I taught a seminar in the seminary called the church's favorite gospel. And Mark was considered to be like cruder and simpler, etc. I will say I took one course on Mark in my life when I enrolled full time at Harvard Divinity School during the year 1984-85. My teacher of Mark was a Greek Orthodox bishop who did his doctorates, I think, on Justin Martyr under Helmut Kester, great New Testament scholar and great figure at Harvard. Demetrius Trakatellis is his name, and he became the head of all the Greek Orthodox for North and South America. He was Greek. And I ran into him at a Sant'Egidio prayer in Washington, D.C. in 2006. He didn't remember me, but I wrote a paper for him, etc., for this course. And what Demetrios Trakatellis said about Mark, and his book that he based himself on was Vincent Taylor's, has nothing to do almost with what I, thought about Mark after doing my research for my doctoral dissertation. He emphasized following, discipleship, etc. And I emphasized something else more eschatological regarding the Temple Act. But I really got stuck early on in my work on the temple verses, and what I decided to do was to simply myself read through the gospel and see what I could get out of it. And that helped quite a bit. I was at an event yesterday with my church group, and a very earnest young man that came from evangelical family, Latin American young man, Spanish speaker. And he said, I want to study the Bible. What should I begin with? Should I begin at the beginning? And what I always tell people is begin with the Gospel of Mark. And in fact, I think I learned to read French by reading the Gospel of Mark. It's have some familiarity with it. You should be able to see what the French is saying from your knowledge of the Gospel of Mark. Maybe not everyone has that facility. And I did my doctoral dissertation on the Gospel of Mark, and I remember, I think from the very first page, I referred to the Messianic secret, which everybody likes to talk about, the Messianic secret, which I think comes from William Rede. But I quote Martin Hengel saying that it's really the Son of God's secret that could characterize the Gospel of Mark. And I think that is perfectly correct. In other words, all these exhortations, admonitions, combinations, and orders that Jesus gives, not to say that he did a miracle or anything, is regarding his identity and not specifically as Messiah necessarily. Even though Peter also says, you are the Christ or the Messiah, and he tells no one, he tells him energically, it says here, epitimesen, he ordered, he kind of rebuked him or something to speak to no one about him, and then immediately he begins to make the first prediction of the passion, which is what gets Peter that scolding, get behind me, Satan. And if anyone wants to go behind me, let him carry his cross, Jesus goes on to say. So that the topic of Son of God is really the theme of Mark. And the title of the gospel, if you will, is the beginning of the gospel of Jesus Christ, the Son of God. I don't think we should have a doubt as to the Son of God being included in this title. I think some Bibles put it in brackets, or did before anyway. I guess they still sort of put it in brackets. But and maybe even with some doubt, but I believe you should keep that, as you should consider the centurion's confession. Truly this man was Son of God, without the article, which my studies, I decided that was, or the scholars convinced me that was irrelevant. So you have two bookends. The gospel is about Jesus Christ, the Son of God, and the centurion at the end confesses that the man he's just seen die was truly the Son of God. And so this expression, Son of God, which we're going to explain because it's not self-explanatory, is something known only to the narrator or writer of the gospel, which, by the way, some people think this is the first, composition of the gospel as the life of Jesus or the ministry of Jesus or Jesus as the gospel. And then in the baptism, you are my beloved Son, says the voice of the Father from heaven, in whom I am pleased. The transfiguration, you have something quite similar. This is my beloved Son, listen to him. So you have that. Jesus has the parable of the murderers, vine dressers. He's the master of the vineyard, the Lord of the vineyard sends his servants, the prophets really, to gather fruit. They're unsuccessful. In the end, he sends a beloved son. So, I mean, if that doesn't convince you that Jesus is son or Abba, when he says Abba, Father, in the Gethsemane scene, well, I mean, the topic is he's the Son of God. But this is known to the narrator, it's known to the Father, it's known to Jesus, and it's known to the demons who in crescendo confess Jesus as the Son of God. In crescendo because the first exorcism in chapter 1 says, what have we to do with you, or what have you to do with us, Jesus of Nazareth? Have you come to destroy us? We know you are the Holy One of God. So Holy One of God could be, maybe Aaron in Psalm 106, or it's parallel to John 6 when Peter replies to the disciples who Jesus has asked, do you too want to leave? And Peter says, who are we to go? You have words of eternal life. We believe and know that you are the Holy One of God. But in Mark, after this exorcism in chapter 1, still in verse 34, when Jesus casts out many demons, he did not allow them to speak because they knew him. And then if you continue looking here, you'll find that in chapter 3, and I don't know if I've skipped anything, but in chapter 3, verse 11, the unclean spirits, when they saw him, would throw themselves at his feet and cry out, you are the Son of God. But he would tell them energically, again, this translation that I have in the Jerusalem Bible in Spanish, he would order them emphatically not to reveal who he was. And so I think that we have this background that leads up to the greatest one, which is the conglomerate demoniac legion, with some hint there of Roman Empire reference. What you have there is this man dwelling in the tombs, possessed by a legion of demons. But when he sees Jesus from afar, he runs and prostrates himself before him and cries out in a loud voice, what have I to do with you, Jesus, Son of God Most High? That's what I mean about the crescendo. From farther away, with more dramatic gestures of submission, and with an increase in the title that they address Jesus with, the demons know who Jesus is preternaturally. So that this gospel is going to talk about the good news that Jesus preached and that he himself is. And it's going to be heavy on the second Exodus in Isaiah, which is going to be finalized by Jesus. The gospel begins very interestingly, saying that according to what is written in Isaiah the prophet, behold, I send my angel before your face, or my messenger before your face, who will prepare your way. A voice crying in the desert, prepare the way of the Lord and make straight his paths. So when you have this, he's quoting Isaiah, second Isaiah, the beginning of the book of the consolation of Israel, which is the end of the Babylonian exile announcement, which is also good news, which is Bezorah in Hebrew, Evangelion in Greek. But he sneakily quoted Malachi chapter 3. Behold, I send my messenger to prepare the way before me. So sort of tweaked something from the prophets, the last prophet, Malachi, my messenger, who is recycling Exodus 23:20 from Egypt. And so you have a prophets, a Torah prophets, New Testament pattern that I've talked about elsewhere. Torah recycled by prophets, fulfilled in the New Testament. And so you have, behold, I'm going to send my angel, or Malachi, or my messenger before you, that he guard you on your way. This is a guardian angel passage. And take you to the makom, or the place that I have prepared, which is the temple. Makom is temple, place. And that's where the destiny of this messenger is in Malachi 3. And I did my doctoral dissertation, as I said, on the temple act when Jesus enters the temple in Mark 11, and then leaves the temple after seeing everything, and then has the fig tree episode, temple act, fig tree sequel. And we're not going to get too much into that because I spoke about that not too long ago. By the way, I have some almost 70, I think, programs on Mark. So I went almost verse by verse in these videos if you look around my channel. So the topic is Jesus is the Son of God, but this is a mystery that cannot be known unless you're a demon, or the Father, or Jesus, or the narrator after the facts, until Jesus has fulfilled his life by dying on the cross in the way that he died. And a human being happens to be a Roman centurion, a Gentile in all probability, says truly this man was the Son of God when he saw how he died. And so we have to discuss what the word Son of God means, the expression Son of God means. And if you went to the Hebrew Bible, Ben Elohim, would be there in the background right from creation. In other words, the idea would be that you have an old man, El, God, Ancient of Days in Daniel 7, white hair, etc. And he lives on Mount Zaphon in the north, in the Ugaritic, North Lebanon area type of place. And he's surrounded by lesser divinities, his court, celestial court, Sod in Hebrew, I call it the kitchen cabinet. And these are the sons of El, his sons. And these are the guys that show up in Job and deliberate with God as to what to do with Job. And the Satan is kind of part of this assembly as an adversary, accuser, etc. And of course, the sons of God see the human women in Genesis 6 and break this horrible boundary between divinity and humanity by having intercourse with them, etc. So the sons of God were like semi deities, which the Septuagint, the Greek translation, is going to turn into angels. Concept of a messenger or angel of some sort. And there's Gabriel and Raphael and these other angels. And so they get away from, having other deities around and clean up the text. The Septuagint does. Even in Deuteronomy 32, it says that they distributed the boundaries of the peoples according to the number of the sons of God. And the Masoretes, the Hebrew transcribers of these copies, copyists, changed it to the sons of Israel. It doesn't make any sense. The second son of God would be Israel. Israel is called my firstborn son in Exodus 4, precisely in these Exodus preparation passages. It says in Exodus 4, I've hardened the heart of Pharaoh, and you will tell Pharaoh, God says to Moses, Israel is a Beni Bakur. Israel is my firstborn son. So that's another son of God in this sense, with a different kind of expression. And then you have the king, the anointed Messiah, is an adopted son of God, as usually it is explained. The famous one would be Psalm 2. You are my son, today I have begotten you. And so you have Psalm 2, the anointed of Yahweh is his son adopted. You also have the great Psalm 89, where you have, he will call me Avi Ata, you are my father, which reminds us of 2 Samuel 7, I will be a father to him, etc. So you have lots of royal Son of God passages, and those are important to remember when we discuss what this Son of God thing means. The third one is very interesting, and I think primarily I'm going to look at the book of wisdom. There you have a righteous sufferer who is called both Huios Theu, son of God. This is a Greek book, the only maybe totally Greek book with no Hebrew antecedent like Ben Sirach or Ben Sira or any some other books. So in the book of wisdom, you have this, and you also have and the expression for this same kind of figure, Pais Theu, would be like the boy of God, the child of God. But Pais, where paideia comes from, education, pedagogy is the leading of the paidos, the child, to school by the slave. The pedagogue would be the slave, forcer of the kid to go to school, kind of thing. Pais is the Septuagint Greek translation of the Ebed Yahweh, the servant or slave of Yahweh, in the Songs of the Suffering Servant. And it's used in Acts 4. In Acts 4, they talk about Jesus as the pies. Your holy pies, Jesus. And sometimes David is also pies in the Psalms. One of my annotations says here, whom you have anointed, etc. So that this righteous sufferer in the book of wisdom is tested like gold. He calls God his father. Let's see if that we'll submit him to an ignominious death and see what he's made of. We'll test him. You know, uh, you know. He confronts us with our faults, etc. He glories in having knowledge of God, like intimacy with God, just like the knowledge that the servant in Isaiah 53 will achieve. And knowledge in Hosea is you know intimacy, even with the sexual background of knowing carnally, etc. He boasts of having knowledge of God and calls himself Son of God. In this case, pies of God. He leads a life different than us. He has us as bastards, illegitimate children. So you could get into all these things, which I'm not going to try to do. But there you have a tremendous background on Son of God. You have a semi-divine meaning or angelic. Some of the theories of the Son of Man in Daniel 7 who comes on the clouds, like John J. Collins, who's a great scholar, he thinks it's maybe the Archangel Michael or something. I don't agree with that. But nevertheless, this sort of second power in heaven, if you will, or this lieutenant of God, the word of God or the name of God or the glory of God, the manifestation of God, all these things could be applied to Jesus, and they are in the Gospel of John. And even in the fourth servant song, he shall be highly exalted and glorified, in the Greek version of the Isaiah 52, 53 fourth poem. And so you have that, and you have Israel, who is the servant in Isaiah, second Isaiah, except I think for the four servant songs, which are embedded and are individual references to an individual, not the collectivity Israel. And I think the argument on that, without getting too much into it, and I think I've spoken about it elsewhere, in 49, there's that famous gloss in Isaiah 49, you are my servant Israel, that breaks up the poetry, etc. And it makes no sense, because the mission of this servant is to make Jacob turn back to God, and that Israel rejoin God. So you don't mission to yourself, you mission to others and bring them back. So that I think that you have these servant poems, and you have this in the background to the Son of God, the suffering in the Book of Wisdom. So that I think what the message of Mark is primarily that God sent his Son. And I think one of the passages that we can do some intertextual interpretation with is precisely that very old parable of the murderers, vine dressers, or tenants, which you may know. There's a version in the Gospel of Thomas which appears to be older, even less embellished. It's like a whole history of Israel, to whom prophets were sent repeatedly, and they were mistreated and killed. And then this crazy God, the sower who sows seeds everywhere and pays the workers in the vineyard the same, whether it's an hour or 8 that they worked, and who's the father of the prodigal son who runs out, indignantly, and does the crazy acceptance of this, wayward son. This crazy lord of the vineyard, after they maltreat all his servants, says, "Oh, I'll send my beloved son at the end now." They'll respect him. And of course, they say he's the heir, and we shall kill him and grab a hold of the vineyard. And they kill him and throw him out of the vineyard. And I think some of the commentators say that there's no reference to resurrection so far here anyway, or in the Gospel of Thomas, but certainly in Mark you have the reference to the stone which the builders rejected has become the cornerstone of the temple, really. And so this is something wonderful the Lord has made. Psalm 118, which we use in the Easter vigil and the Easter period too. I think you can intertextually understand what is being said in that parable in Mark by going to the beginning of Hebrews, where you have the same kind of idea that in the history of Israel, God spoke in many different and variegated ways to our fathers through the prophets. But in these last days, he has spoken to us through a son. Very different than the other uses of son in the Hebrew Bible that we talked about. Whom he has made heir of everything, through whom he also made the worlds, who being the splendor of his glory and character of his hypostasis, sort of like the very representation of God. And some of this is taken from the Book of Wisdom. In fact, two things here are taken from the Book of Wisdom. He sustains everything with his powerful word, and having brought about purification of sins, sort of like the repose that is alluded to in 2 Samuel 7, the messianic prophecy, he has sat. He's finished his work. He has sat. All his enemies round about, like 2 Samuel 7, at the right hand of the majesty in the heights, with a superiority over the angels, which is much greater in that he has exceeded them by the name, which my professor Vanois says the name is Huios, son. That's the name he has inherited. So that what Mark is doing is to take I think, a historical fact that Jesus had a consciousness of being God's son in a unique way, and that he therefore addressed his father uniquely, Abba, with a familiar address of intimacy and familiarity. And I also think that when he, in his baptism, was joined the crowd of sinners and went through this conversion symbolization ritual, confession of some sort, not like, in a little booth, but just in general. Um, I do think he had this experience of the heavens opened and the Spirit come down, and he received what I call the messianic package rather, which is, it sounds like good news. It's like a lawyer's letter, dear so and so, and you know that from an enemy lawyer or from a lawyer, dear so and so is not good news, even though it says dear and sincerely. You are my beloved Son, in whom I am pleased. If you read between the lines, and I think Jesus knew how to do that very well, and the scholars point this out, you would find echoes of Genesis 22, the sacrifice of Isaac. I've been reading Raymond Brown on that a little bit. There's a whole book called The Last Trial on the parallels between the Jewish tradition regarding Isaac's binding, Akedah, and Jesus, including resurrection elements. In whom I am pleased would be Isaiah 42. Behold my servant whom I uphold, my chosen one in whom my soul delights, etc. And this is in the first placid part of second Isaiah, chapters 40 through 47. And therefore the first servant poem, 42, 1 through 4 or 6 or whatever cutoff you want. This is all nice so far, but the community will reject this anonymous prophet servant. And in 49, which we briefly saw, he already is discouraged and has, problems like Jeremiah had with his mission. And he's actually given a harder and more extensive mission. And then, of course, in 50, and we just saw this in Lent, he is, insulted and they pull on his beard and all these kinds of things. And he's still speaking about himself. But when you get to the fourth song in 52, beginning in 13, behold, my servant shall have insight or prosper and shall be lifted up and raised up and very high, etc. There, a spokesperson has to speak for him. And so you have in Mark, right from the beginning of the baptism, two things. You have the declaration that Jesus is God's Son and that he's also the servant, which means that the Son is going to suffer. Most of the time, I think there's 7 predictions in Mark where usually it's coupled with the Son of Man is giving his life as a ransom for many, etc. And there you have the Son of Man of Daniel, which is not a humble self, appellative. He doesn't humbly say, I am just a human being, the Son of Man. He's talking about this Son of Man in Daniel who gets all power and glory, and nations and tongues will praise him after the exousia or power, Shaltan, has been removed from the beasts and given to one like a human being, the Son of Man. And his kingdom will never be destroyed. So if Jesus referred to himself as Son of Man, which I think he did, and in the Sanhedrin trial, they ask him, "Are you the Christ, the Son of the Blessed?" And he says, "I am." I always call it guilty with an explanation. And you will see the Son of Man coming at the right hand of the Majesty on the clouds. Because being Son of God is inseparable from being the Son of Man, both in the similarity of the exalted status of these two titles, but in also in the mysterious sense, unique, that the Son of Man must suffer. I mean, I've looked at different authors, including Nicholsburg, who's very, very good on Enoch and all that. In Enoch, you have, the first Enoch, you have Messiah, chosen servant, Son of Man, all combined. But you won't find a reference to their suffering. And you can look for the suffering Messiah here and there. It's very difficult to glean anything grabbable out of that. So the idea that the Son of God or the Son of Man or some exalted final end, final days figure who would conquer the enemies and save Israel would suffer, that was something unique about Jesus. And I've had I think I did a video on the passion and resurrection of Jesus. He could not have escaped that conclusion early on, because his message and his whole bringing the good news and conversion, the kingdom of God in the Roman Empire, that wasn't going to turn out very good socio-politically. So Jesus knew that the prophets were killed, and he knew that he would be the culmination of that. If we give any credence to what I think it's a Q passage, I always go to Matthew 23 because I remember that more than the Lucan Q version of this. All the blood of this generation, all the blood of the Bible, from Abel's to Zechariah the priest, will be on this generation. But the final righteous blood to be shed is going to be Jesus's. So that this to me is what the Gospel of Mark is about. And I think it was written by a Jew to non-Jews. He explains certain things, etc. It's very possible that he wrote it for Rome. And it's very interesting that in Mark 9, it talks about the end of Isaiah, where their worm shall not die and their fire will not be quenched, because all are to be salted with fire. That's Jewish sacrifice language. Good is salt, but if salt becomes tasteless, with what shall you season? These look like little sayings put together. Have salt among yourselves and peace with one another. Because all of you are to be salted with fire. And so, Jesus talks about he's come to bring fire on the earth, and, he drinks the cup. And can you drink this cup? And there's a baptism of fire that I have to go through, etc. I think he was aware of his Holocaust early on. And I think that what Mark is trying to do is to tell his story, keeping it a mystery as it was until the whole thing has finalized. And that would be with the resurrection. That would be with all the reasons that Mark has written this gospel. He ends, as is well known, without any descriptions of resurrection appearances, just an empty tomb and women who are afraid and disobey the angel and say nothing. But then there's that longer ending where, apparently taking from Luke or something, Jesus appears in another form, etc. And therefore you have a proper ending to the Gospel of Mark. But it's a wonderful gospel, and tomorrow is his feast, and I kind of promised to myself that I would do uh, this kind of program in Spanish tomorrow, talking about the Gospel of Mark. I'm not sure how that's going to go. But in any case, I wanted to do this little program on the Gospel of Mark, and I think its main topic, which is Jesus as the mysterious Son of God, only revealed in the end of his life to a human being, and then known as Son of God by the church who believes in him, as reflected in the first verse of the letter to the Hebrews.